Well, thank you everyone for coming today to our summer school. Martin's with us. He's kindly agreed to share his life story of living with dementia. Um, I'm Hannah, an Admiral nurse, consultant Admiral nurse for children and young people. It's a new role that has started, and it's great to be here at summer school to really talk about dementia and also other types of dementia, more the rarer types. Um, and it's to explore the symptoms and how it affects people as well. So I don't know, Martin, if you wanted to eh, introduce yourself and explain the type of dementia that you have.
Well, I think it's fair to say I've got a pretty rare dementia. I think I live in Scotland, and I think there's just less than 50 of us in Scotland with it.
Okay.
It's called posterior cortical atrophy, and it, as the name suggests, it starts at the back instead of the front. And that obviously means I have very untypical symptoms. I was going to my neurologist about one-sided headaches,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all I was thinking about. But when I was driving, I knew my eyes weren't very good, but I just thought that was my eyesight and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the neurologist at 6:30 one night.
Mm-hmm.
I did the Montreal test, and I got 26 out of 30. However, the two infinity symbols were on opposite edges of the paper, and I could swear I'd put them together. He turned around to me and said, at the top, this is what he said at the time: Mr. Robertson, you've got frontotemporal lobe dementia, and I'm advising you not to drive anymore.
Right.
I basically just didn't know what to say or do.
Quite a shock for
So
you then.
yeah, I wasn't, especially as I actually worked in a dementia daycare centre, and no one noticed. They knew I was a bit forgetful and that was just, they put it down to age and everything else. But so all I really said was, "Oh, does that mean I can't work?" And he said, "Oh, you have to go and see a GP tomorrow. Goodbye," basically. So it was about 7 o'clock by this time. I went out into the waiting room. No one, nothing there. So we went to the car. Luckily, I had my wife with me, or else I'd have had to drive despite the warning, because we lived in the country. And again, unlike most people, I was actually happy to get my diagnosis. Because first of all, I'd come out with what I'd gone in with, so there was nothing new there then.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the end. I knew what the end would be, and I wanted to be able to do what I wanted, when I wanted, if I wanted. And it's got to such a point that since that time, I've never worn a watch, because I don't need to. I do have diary commitments, but I don't have to clock on and off like a paid worker. Anyway, it turns out that PCA is also called brain blindness, because it's the brain that is deciding how much I can see. Nowadays, if I'm in the car in the front passenger seat or even the back, I have to close my eyes like I am now. That's a different story. I'll tell you that in a minute. Because if I can see too much at once, because the sorry, because after everything had got sorted, we moved back to Scotland, and I went to the GP, and she sent me straight to the old age psychiatrist, and I said, "Well, I'm not old and I'm not psychiatric." So he really wanted rid of me, I think. But he did say, "Well, it's not frontotemporal, but I don't know what it is." So he sent me off to the neurologist, and he is a lovely guy. And I would say, if you have to have dementia, get one of the rare dementias like PCA, because I get post-diagnostic support every 3 months for the rest of my life. Because he's nosy, he's told me himself he wants to learn more about it, and so does the dementia nurse. So I get to see them every 6 months, so basically every 3 months.
That's a part. So how old were you when you were diagnosed with PCA?
58.
58.
And I had obviously 8 years left, and we had plans to travel because we love Iceland of all places.
Mhm.
And that's the only thing really that I miss now is the traveling, because I can't really. I live about an hour's drive from Aberdeen, and even getting to Aberdeen and back in the days knocks me out for the rest of the day.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing. Another, yeah. So he poked and prodded and did more than one PET scan as well, MRIs, and actually in Hull, where I was first diagnosed, I had 5 lumbar punctures in half an hour because I had scoliosis, and I felt every single one of them. However, I was actually an inpatient at the time because they said it was easy to do tests if you're an inpatient. So I just kept myself hydrated. So it wasn't too bad after a while. But in Aberdeen, he had poked and prodded, done his MRI, done his PETs, and nothing showing. So he said, I got one more test for you, Mr. Robertson. And I quite literally stamped my feet like a kid and said, no, I've had enough. But Ethel, my wife, said, go on, have one more. And then he said the dreaded words, I want you to have a lumbar puncture. So I started again. He said, no, you've got to have it, sort of thing. This one I actually never felt. And the only worrying thing was after a lumbar puncture, you get a letter telling you we will contact you within 2 days if you've got mad cow disease, which is a bit worrying for the first 2 days.
Yeah.
But obviously nothing happened. But he had asked for what's called the tau measurement. Most people have amyloids that block the brain, but tau can also do it. And my tau was enormously raised, I think 800 or something. So he said, yes, you've got what's called posterior cortical atrophy because I was describing my symptoms. Because I also say I live on another planet because I see 2 moons every night. And he said, for some reason, he said, go and see an optician. And up here, you get a free optician every year. So I went. And he gave me a pair of specs, but that was the worst possible thing because the spectacles actually allowed me to see too much. Okay. And even driving from the optician to home, which is 10 miles, my brain was overloaded. So I had to go and collapse in the bedroom. So no more specs.
A lot of investigation that you had to come to that diagnosis, which is quite typical of a rare dementia as well, isn't it? But often health professionals aren't aware of the rarer types and the symptoms and pinpointing it to that diagnosis.
Looking back, the consultant, and I'm not being rude or anything, but the consultant in Hull was in his late 50s, early 60s, so probably never heard of PCA. It's just a fact of life. Because the neurologist shunted me back to the old psychiatrist, and all he could find was a 1-page document from Wikipedia, I think it was, he found it, of all things. So he said, I think you'd better go back to the neurologist after all this. So I was stuck with the neurologist. He's lovely. And as I say, I get to see him every 6 months. And every time I go in, there's a different set of students because they're learning. I don't mind. So then I heard up here in Scotland, if you get registered visually impaired, you get a free training pass. So anything for a freebie. I went to the hospital to see the optical consultant. And obviously, I became visually impaired. And he walked me down a corridor to another room and said to this volunteer, I've got Terry Pratchett for you because Terry Pratchett had PCA and he called it it's not a swear word, an embuggerance, which is quite a good word for it, I think. So I sat with this guy, a volunteer from the local sensory service, and I just had a good laugh for two hours discussing things like using a cane, using the cane to kick people in the ankles and things like that.
So it's adapting, isn't it, to the symptoms of a rare dementia, PCA, because it's affecting the back of your brain, isn't it? Your memory's not impaired, isn't it? It's about keeping you independent, adapting and looking at ways to keep you independent and supported and to hear that's real sort of lack of information, awareness, and resources that for you to learn about the condition as well. So I guess you've had to learn about the condition from your own experience and an impact on your sort of wider family as well.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, basically yes. And as I say, the rest of me is collapsing, but the cognitive and memory functions are still there,
Hmm.
and they're actually better than they should be. And the neurologist is asking me questions that he couldn't ask others with PCA, because I can tell him why I do something or what I do at some time.
Hmm.
So, but another symptom is if I'm reading, my ears close off, so it's a kind of brain deafness. We never noticed this until my wife started shouting at me and thought I was being deaf, kind of being man deaf. But it turns out that, yeah, my brain is deciding it wants to put all the processing power, if you like, into the eyes and not the ears.
Right.
So it's really quite clever.
So you're looking at other senses, isn't it? I suppose your eyes are what you see is affected. Your other senses pick up and you adapt to that world around you as
Yeah.
well.
And we live in a small village, and there's a couple of stories. The first one is I walk my dog every day, and for the first couple of weeks, I staggered a bit because I wasn't really, that's
Mhm,
part of the symptoms. And I walked into a couple of bushes that overhang the road, overhang the pavement.
mhm,
And a couple of times people were shouting over, "You shouldn't be out with your dog, he's drunk." So I just didn't say anything, but we found out who the local gossip was and went to their door and knocked on it. So that was sorted.
mhm. So people's lack of awareness, isn't it, of
Yeah,
the symptoms, isn't it, of the PCA and assume that dementia is a memory issue. And I suppose so your neighbourhood and your family. So how does it affect the whole family? You know, with my role working with children, it'd be
yeah.
interesting to hear
It
the younger
irritates
generations.
it irritates my wife because obviously I don't hear her.
Hmm.
With the children, we have my children have grown up. Uh, we have a daughter who lives about 200 yards away. She had seen deterioration. She knew there was something up, but her husband is what we call a oiler. He works offshore, 3 weeks on, three
Okay.
weeks off, and he couldn't believe I had dementia because once a week we do a family quiz and I was still on top.
Hmm. So they're just
He,
missing your diagnosis, and
yeah,
yeah, must be
but
frustrating.
I discussed it with Ethel, and it turns out that I was putting on a front because I do put on a front if I've got people up.
Hmm.
It's because after he left, I usually went to collapse. But now, when I don't put on a front, so if I'm tired in front of him, I'll go stand off to bed, and it
Hmm.
kind of that he now realizes how bad that is.
Hmm. And what about your grandchildren? How are they? And how do you explain your symptoms to children, your grandchildren?
It's an interesting one because their other grandfather has signs of dementia, but it's obviously a relatively normal type.
Okay.
But if you like, I was first, so we told them I had dementia, and but it wasn't an average one. I think is the word we use because
Hmm.
the two I'm talking about are now 11 and 9.
Okay.
So that stage they're probably about 7 and something. And just saying that granddad gets very tired occasionally, needs to go and have a lie down. It'll, it takes him longer to hear what you're saying to him, so he might have to repeat it.
Hmm.
And he doesn't like too much loud noise.
That's
So
that
they
education,
accept
isn't
that.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think children, it's so important to share information about the types of dementia, isn't it? And that everyone is an individual and there are many different types of dementia, and having the rarer type and looking at what you still can do, isn't it? The engagement with your family, like you say, doing the quizzes, that to see you, not the diagnosis, isn't it? And keep independent as long as possible. And we're really grateful for you to share your experience of what actually it's like to live with PCA, because you're the person living with it, and that's how we learn to support people. So we really appreciate you talking today. So thank you so much.
On a normal day, I find it hard to really quite literally walk and talk because I'm concentrating on walking, so I can't listen too much, and that is annoying to people around me because obviously it's just a natural thing that people do.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most annoying part of it for everyone. I do stagger a bit, and the furniture is kind of in place. It's been in place for 6 or 7 years, and it will stay in place. So that's we live on the flat, so that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go. To be honest, I'm probably in bed 12 hours a day, but because I have a nap in the morning, nap in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
I need to have them. If I don't have them, I'm in bed by 6 and I'm asleep by 7, and then I get my 12 hours that way.
So you get very tired very
I get
easily.
better quite easily if I'm doing something, having to use my brain, if you like.
Yeah.
But in ways that you wouldn't even think, like just traveling in a car or listening to someone. But I think all sounds like, I don't know what it's called, but when someone starts singing and then people start singing after they've sung the first line. I went to one of those things once, and within 2 minutes, I was what I call catatonic. All I can do in those cases is take my wife's hand, and I only hear her voice, and she'll guide me back to the car.
Right.
And I just have to go into a sensory-free room, dark and without any sound. And 45 minutes later, I'm back to my normal self, not what I was pre-diagnosis, but what I'm normally like.
Yeah.
It's just the brain needs to reset itself.
That tiredness, isn't it? And
Yeah.
they're having sort of overstimulation, isn't it, of the environment, but still wanting to do things. And
I would like to finish by saying that you need to keep your brain active, whatever type of dementia one has. And a way of doing it that should be more publicized and used is getting us to actually help with research, not be research on, but help design and do the research. Because I think that's really stimulated me. And my neurologist has actually said that's what's kept me out of care. He thinks that's what's kept the rest of the cognitive functions better than they should be. Because I was told I'd be in care by 2022, and obviously I'm not. And that's what I think is keeping me going.
that's it's so important to keep active, isn't it? Keep the mind active, and research, isn't it? We don't have a cure for dementia, so that research that you provide is helping us understand the disease, but also how to support people going forward too. So it's been so lovely talking to you, Martin. And if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Martin or myself, please do put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them. So thank you so much, Martin, for sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.